meaning, features, and elements of culture. Culture is a holistic and integrated whole system. Cultures are integrated systems in which each part, trait, is functionally linked to all of the others and all cultural aspects fit together causally. Culture involves a communication system of acquired beliefs, memories, perceptions, traditions, and attitudes that serve to supplement and channel instinctive behavior. Culture is learned collective human behavior, which is socially transmitted, such as customs, belief, morals, technology, and art, rather than biologically transmitted. It, therefore, has nothing to do with instinct, inborn or genetics. Individuals acquire integrated sets of behavioral patterns, environmental and social perceptions, and knowledge of existing technologies. Man learns culture through the process of socialization, enumeration, personal experience, and through deliberate indoctrination or teaching. It should be noted that learning of culture is a lifelong process from birth to death. Basic features of culture. Culture is organic and supraorganic. Culture is implicit and explicit. Culture is stable and changing. Culture is overt and covert. Culture is learned and shared. Culture is symbolic. Culture is ideal and manifest. Elements of culture. Culture includes within itself elements that make up the essence of a society or a social group. The major ones include symbols, values, norms, and language. 1. Symbols. Symbols are the central components of culture. Symbols refer to anything to which people attach meaning and which they use to communicate with others. More specifically, symbols are words, objects, gestures, sounds, or images that represent something else rather than themselves. Symbolic thought is unique and crucial to humans and to culture. It is the human ability to give a thing or event an arbitrary meaning and grasp and appreciate that meaning. There is no obvious natural or necessary connection between a symbol and what it symbolizes. 2. Language. Language, specifically defined as a system of verbal and in many cases written symbols with rules about how those symbols can be strung together to convey more complex meanings, is the distinctive capacity and possession of humans. It is a key element of culture. Culture encompasses language, and through language, culture is communicated and transmitted. Without language, it would be impossible to develop, elaborate, and transmit culture to the future generation. 3. Values. Values are essential elements of non-material culture. They may be defined as general, abstract guidelines for our lives, decisions, goals, choices, and actions. They are shared ideas of a group's or a society as to what is right or wrong, correct or incorrect, desirable or undesirable, acceptable or unacceptable, ethical or unethical, etc., regarding something. They are general roadmaps for our lives. Values are shared and are learned in group. They can be positive or negative. For example, honesty, truth-telling, respect for others, hospitality, helping those in need, etc., are positive values. Examples of negative values include theft, indecency, disrespect. Are also diversified, meaning they vary from place to place and culture to culture. Some values are universal because there is biopsychological unity among people everywhere and all times. In other words, they emanate from the basic similarity of mankind's origins, nature, and desires. For example, dislike for killing people, concepts and practices of disease management, cleanliness, personal hygiene, cosmetics, incest taboo, etc. 4. Norms. Norms are also essential elements of culture. They are implicit principles for social life, relationship, and interaction. Norms are detailed and specific rules for specific situations. They tell us how to do something, what to do, what not to do, when to do it, why to do it, etc. Norms are derived from values. That means, for every specific norm, there is a general value that determines its content. Individuals may not act according to the defined values and norms of the group. Therefore, violation of values and norms and deviating from the standard values and norms are often common. Social norms may be divided into two. These are mores and folkways. Mores are important and stronger social norms for existence, safety, well-being, and continuity of the society or the group or society. Violation of, and deviation from these kinds of norms may result in serious reactions from the groups. The strongest norms are regarded as the formal laws of a society or a group. Formal laws are written and codified social norms. The other kinds of mores are called conventions. Conventions are established rules governing behavior. They are generally accepted ideals by the society. Conventions may also be regarded as written and signed agreements between nations to govern the behaviors of individuals, groups, and nations. Folkways are the ways of life developed by a group of people. They are detailed and minor instructions, traditions, or rules for day-to-day life that help us function effectively and smoothly as members of a group. Here, violating such kinds of norms may not result in a serious punishment, unlike violating mores. They are less morally binding. In other words, folkways are appropriate ways of behaving and doing things. Examples may include table etiquette, dressing rules, walking, talking, etc. A society or a human society is thus a group of people related to each other through persistent relations such as a social status, roles, and social networks. Human societies are characterized by patterns of relationships between individuals sharing a distinctive culture and institutions. Types of cultural region. A cultural region is a geographical unit based on characteristics and functions of culture. There are 3 types of cultural regions which are recognized by geographers. These are formal, functional, and vernacular regions. 1. Formal culture region is an area inhabited by people who have one or more cultural traits in common, such as language, religion, or system of livelihood. It is an area that is relatively homogeneous with regard to one or more cultural traits that are dominant. 2. Functional culture region. This type of region need not be culturally homogeneous. Instead, it is an area that has been organized to function politically, socially, or economically as one unit. Functional region is thus an area tied together by a coordinating system such as law, monetary system, roads, etc. A city, an independent state, a trade area, or a farm is a functional culture region. Functional culture regions have nodes, or central points where the functions are coordinated and directed. 3. A vernacular cultural region is also called popular or perceptual regions. Vernacular cultural regions are those perceived to exist by their inhabitants, as evidenced by the widespread acceptance and use of a special regional name. Vernacular regions generally lack sharp borders. Vernacular region is an area that ordinary people or non-geographers recognize as a region. For instance, the Great Somalia, which includes the people of Somali in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. It can be based on many different things such as physical environment, economic, political, historical aspects, and often created by publicity campaigns. Cultural diffusion is the spatial spread of learned ideas, innovations, and attitudes. It is the spread of culture and the factors that account for it, such as migration, communications, trade, and commerce. Almost all cultures of the world, probably with the exceptions of those few cultural groups who are completely, if there are any, isolated, are products of innovations that spread from locations of origin to another. In general, cultural region describes the location of cultural traits or cultural communities. Cultural diffusion helps explain how they got there. Types of cultural diffusion. There are 2 broad categories of diffusion processes. 1. Expansion diffusion. 2. Relocation diffusion. 1. Expansion diffusion refers to the spread of an idea or item from one place to another. The innovation or idea develops in a core or source area and remains strong and spreads outward. The expansions of ideas and/or innovations diffuse in 3 forms. A. Contagious diffusion, a form of expansion diffusion in which some item of culture is spread through a local population by contact from person to person. Ideas and techniques radiate outwards. Trough, the neighborhood effect. Here, ideas spread through a group of people or an area equally without regard to social class, economic position, or position of power. B. Hierarchical diffusion, a type of expansion diffusion where ideas are transmitted through leapfrog from one node to another temporarily by passing some within the pre-existing hierarchical structures. In other words, it is the spread of an idea through an established structure, usually from people or areas of power down to other people or areas. An idea or innovation spreads by trickling down from larger to smaller adoption units. Innovations often leapfrog over wide areas, with geographic distance a less important influence. C. Stimulus diffusion, a process where an idea or innovation is not readily adopted by a receiving population. Some are simply too vague, too unattainable, or otherwise empirical for immediate adoption. But this does not mean that such ideas have no impact at all. They may result local experimentation and eventually changes in ways of doing things. The Industrial Revolution, for example, did not immediately spread to pre- or non-industrial societies, but did stimulate attempts to mechanize local handicraft manufacturing and thus had an indirect impact. It is also the spread of an underlying principle, concept, or idea, without the spread of specific accompanying traits due to some cultural or other barrier to the movement of the idea. 2. Relocation diffusion. Relocation diffusion is the spreading of innovations by a migrating population. It involves the actual movement of individuals along with ideas and techniques who have already adopted the idea or innovation, and who carry it with them to a new, perhaps distant locale, where they disseminate it. Migration of Christianity with European settlers who moved to Africa, America, and Australia is a classic example. One form of relocation diffusion is migrant diffusion. Migrant diffusion occurs when an innovation originates and enjoys strong, but brief, adoption there. The innovation may travel long distance and be thriving but could be faded out back at the point of origination. Barriers of cultural diffusion. 1. Time and distance decay. The further innovation is from its source, the less likely it is to be adopted. Some with time, the acceptance of innovation became less likely the longer it takes to each particular adopter. 2. Physical environment. This refers to the barrier of physical environment such as isolation by ocean, mountains, climate, etc. For example, the Atlantic Ocean was a physical barrier that prevented the westward spread of European culture for many centuries. Physical barriers no longer hinder people's movement and the resultant spread of cultural ideas. Expansion diffusion has recently played a role in the new spread of cultural values and as products and people is now moving around frequently because of the today's ease of travel. 3. Cultural barriers. Certain ideas, practices, or innovations are not acceptable or adoptable in particular cultures because of some attitude or even taboos. Examples include difference in language, religion, race, and ethnicity, and a history of conflict between specific cultural communities. Islam, for instance, nowadays acts as a cultural barrier in Afghanistan by discouraging adoption of certain styles of Western dress, alcohol, and music. In addition, Catholics are not allowed to use contraceptives, and Orthodox Church in Ethiopia prohibits eating pork. For much of human history, therefore, barrier effects tended to isolate cultural communities from each other, inhibiting their ability to share cultural characteristics. Today, however, traditional barrier effects are being overwhelmed by modern means of communication. Cultural characteristics are diffusing as never before. Cultural ecology. The science of ecology is the study of a two-way relationship between an organism and its physical environment. Cultural ecology is thus defined as the multiple interactions and relationships between a culture and its natural environment. 4 schools of thought are developed by cultural geographers on cultural ecology or on the interaction between humans and physical environment. These are environmental determinism, possibilism, environmental perception, and human as modifiers of the earth. Environmental determinism. Environmental determinism is the belief that the environment, most notably its physical factors such as land forms and/or climate, determines the patterns of human culture and societal development and shapes humans' actions and thoughts. Environmental determinists believe that it is these environmental factors alone that are responsible for human cultures and individual decisions. Nonetheless, they see that social conditions or human beings have virtually no impact on cultural development. For them, humankind is essentially a passive product of the physical environment. The main argument of environmental determinism states that an area's physical characteristics have a strong impact on the psychological outlook of its inhabitants. These varied outlooks then spread throughout a population and help define the overall behavior and culture of a society. For instance, it was said that areas in the tropics were less developed than higher latitudes because the continuously warm weather there made it easier to survive, and thus, people living there did not work as hard to ensure their survival. Another example of environmental determinism is that dark human skin was caused by the climate of sub-Saharan Africa. Possibilism. Possibilism is a school of thought that people, not the environment, is the dynamic forces of culture development. The needs, traditions, and technological level of culture affect how that culture assesses the possibilities of an environment and shapes the choices it makes regarding them. It stated that the physical environment sets limitations for cultural development, but it does not completely define culture, instead is defined by the opportunities and decisions that humans make in response to limitations. Unlike environmental determinism, possibilism claims that people are the primary architects of culture. Physical environment offers numerous ways for a culture to develop. Nonetheless, people make culture trait choices from the possibilities offered by their environment to satisfy their needs. The other saying is that possibilism is the scientific philosophy that the environment does not determine elements of culture, but it does set bounds on the possible or probable forms that culture will take. It declares that natural environments offer opportunities and constraints from which culture groups must choose, based on their knowledge and internal power relations. The choices that a society makes depend on the people's requirements and the technology available to them to satisfy their needs. High technology societies are less influenced by physical environment. C. Environmental perception. Environmental perception focuses on human perception of nature. The mental images of individuals and cultural group of the physical environment, shaped by knowledge, ignorance, experience, values, and emotions, are defined as environmental perception. Whereas the possibilist sees humankind as having a choice of different possibilities in a given physical setting, the environmental perceptionist declares that the choices of people make will depend more on what they perceive on the environment to be than on the actual character of the land. D. Humans as modifiers of the earth. Humans have the capacity to modify, indeed to transform, their natural environments. The influence of the natural environment declines with increasing modernization and technological sophistication. Hence, human modification varies from one culture to another. On the other hand, a technology enables humans not only to occupy an environment and exploit its resources, but also to modify the environment in the process. One extreme view, that of environmental determinism, sees nature as the major control. The other extreme postulates the dominance of culture over nature, and there are many intermediate views. Geographers warn control over environment may be an illusion because of possible future climatic changes. The relationships between human societies and the natural environment is complex. Environment affects societies in countless ways, from the type of crops grown to the houses they build, but societies also modify their natural environments in ways that range from slight to severe. One thing is certain, however, while human behavior is not controlled by the environment, no culture, no matter how sophisticated, can completely escape the forces of nature. The central argument of cultural ecology is that the natural environment is a major contributor to social organization and other human institutions. Cultural integration could mean the interactions of different elements of culture in creating a whole system. All facets of culture are systematically and spatially intertwined and integrated. Cultures are complex wholes rather than series of unrelated traits. They form integrated systems in which the parts fit together causally. All aspects of culture are functionally interdependent on one another. The theme of cultural integration addresses this complexity. Cultural integration recognizes that a change in one element of culture requires an accommodating change in others. The distribution of one facet of culture cannot be understood without studying the variations in other facets, in order to see how they are interrelated and integrated causally with one another. Culture is a holistic and integrated whole system. Cultures are integrated systems in which each part, trait, is functionally linked to all of the others and all cultural aspects fit together causally. It is to mean that if one part of the culture changes, this necessitates change in all other related parts. Changing one cultural trait requires an accommodating change in others. Cultural integration is also focused on the relationships that often exist among cultural components that characterize a given community. When geographers seek to explain why a particular culture trait which is found in a particular area, they often discover that the answer lies in another trait possessed by that same cultural community. Moreover, cultural integration can explain the presence and the absence of particular traits in particular areas. This demonstrates that cultural components are interrelated. Cultural landscape. It consists of material aspects of culture that characterize Earth's surface, including buildings, shrines, sports and recreational facilities, economic and agricultural structures, crops and agricultural fields, transportation systems, and other physical things. Cultural landscape is the visible, material landscape that cultural groups create in inhabiting the earth. Cultural landscape is the human imprint cultures leave on the earth's surface. All humanized landscapes bear cultural meaning. Landscape can serve as a means to study non-material aspects of culture. Landscapes are mirror of culture. One can read a landscape like a book. All cultures change over time though, at different rates. As a result, the cultural landscape of a given locale may look much different today than in the past. For example, the skyline of Addis Ababa city is much taller today than it used to be. Similarly, large areas of Addis Ababa have seen the transformation of farmland to suburbs. Typically, cultural landscapes change in bits and pieces. As a result, the cultural landscape may be a tool for understanding the history and status of a given area, as well as